Alright YouTube, so we are back, of course, to talk about some Final Fantasy VII Remake. Damn, it feels good to be back. Obviously, we took a break for the holidays. Also, my birthday is on December 24th, so kind of took a break for that reason as well. Had a family over the last couple days, so I was like, fuck it, we won't upload for a little while. But we're back today, of course. So today's video, it's a discussion I want to have for a little bit. It's something we've talked about in a previous video where we talked about looking at the old guides and walkthroughs for FF7 and kind of trying to decipher where we think or how far they're going to go into the FF7 story with Part 2. Thing is, we did that at the end of the video. We talked about the number of locations between Calm and Nibelheim, for example. And I want to go a little more in detail with that with this video. Now, as with a lot of our videos, it's something I already thought I did a video on because we've done so much content over the last, however many years on FF7. But apparently, it was only ever mentioned at the end of that video from what I can find on my channel, so here we are. Now, obviously, any sort of video like this is entirely, purely speculation. We have zero idea how much content they're going to try to put into Remake Part 2. And with this topic over the last couple of years, I've seen, fan speculation all over the place, because based on the fact that they crammed the Midgar segment into its entire own game, it's kind of hard to wonder, to discuss this, because who knows how much they're going to expand each and every location throughout the FF7 world, the world of Gaia, of course. And I've seen speculation as far as, we've talked about, potentially the game, Part 2 ending at Junon, which would suck, but maybe that's possible, depending on how much they want to expand that location and other locations before it. We've obviously, plenty of times on this channel, discussed the game potentially ending at Nibelheim, which is, the camp that I fall under. Some people think that it could go as far as the end of Disc 1 with the original game, which is City of the Ancients. And then some people think it could go as far as the North Crater. So again, fan speculation is all over the place with this topic. So for me, what I think is the best way to do this is based on locations, because I think it's pretty safe to say that with most of the locations in FF7, they're going to expand that into its own, chapter, I would think. Similar to what they did with the Midgar segment. Each, sector and each place we visit ends up being its own chapter for the most part. And actually, since we made that video 10 months ago, we've got an episode intermission, which the ending of actually gives us a bit of answers for what they could do in Part 2. For example, we see Chocobo Bill giving our characters a ride, right? Well, I was kind of on the fence of what they're going to do with Chocobo Farm, but the fact that he's a character means that Chocobo Farm is potentially going to be its own location. Now, whether or not that would be its own chapter, it's hard to really say, but they could maybe do Chocobo Farm, but also the swamps with the Midgar Zalm as its own chapter potentially. But we also have Chocobo Bill giving our characters a ride to Calm itself, so we know that we're not going to be opening up Part 2 with our characters walking within the wasteland, so we can kind of skip that area potentially, and it's probably going to open up damn near with the Calm flashback. So, and the Calm flashback itself was a pretty lengthy segment in the original FF7, 20 to 30 minutes or something. So the Calm flashback itself could be its own dedicated chapter, if not more than one chapter, potentially. But even on top of those things, the ending of episode intermission gave us a bit of an update on Zack. So we see them cut away to Zack again for a second time now with Remake. So there's a good chance that going into Part 2, we could be playing with our main characters for a while, for maybe a couple of chapters, and then maybe it cuts away to Zack. Now, whether or not they're just going to give us a cutscene for Zack, or maybe we get to control him, play with Zack for a whole chapter or two. Who knows, right? It's hard to say what they're going to do with this, but it does seem like they're going to be giving us more updates, I would think, on Zack and what exactly is going on with this character. And to be honest, them cutting between our main party and Zack, hopefully him getting his own chapter or two here and there, it'd be nice to control the character of Zack again after Crisis Core. It's been so damn long. That'd be a good way for them to save locations where they don't, assuming that each major location in the FF7 world would get its own chapter, we could essentially play with our main party for maybe a couple of chapters, and when the story's kind of slowing down, they could cut away to Zack and we could control him for a chapter, kind of figure out what he's doing, what the story is with him. Is he alive? Is he dead? What's going on exactly, right? So without us really having any knowledge for Part 2, other than based on what Nomura said in some interviews, that there might be some level of exploration, we don't really know. So what we can do is base it off of Remake Part 1. Part 1, of course, had 18 chapters, so we just can go with the discussion of Part 2 also having 18 chapters. But then you also have, of course, the major locations, the named locations around Gaia, having their own dedicated chapters, at least one, if not more. We can kind of speculate where Part 2 might end up. So for starters, the main theory out there is that the game Part 2 is going to open up with the Calm flashback. Calm flashback itself, of course, is going to be at least one chapter. I don't think they'd split it into two. Again, it's a lengthy segment from the original game, but I think it'll be its own one singular chapter. That's kind of a given at this point. Now, after the flashback, you have to discuss whether or not Calm itself is going to have some sort of chapter or story to it. And I think it will, because we've seen them do that with Remake Part 1. The train graveyard is a prime example. That was a location that had absolutely zero dialogue in the original FF7. But of course, when it came to Final Fantasy VII Remake, they turned this into an entire dedicated chapter with its own story. So what that could be for Calm, I have no idea. I don't even know off the top of my head. I can't even remember if there's any named characters within the town of Calm, so I don't even know where to begin or what they could do with the story there. Now, past this, we have, of course, the Chocobo Farm, which we've already discussed earlier in this video. I don't think it's going to be its own dedicated, like, location/story, but you could incorporate it with the story for, say, the swamp outside the Mithril Mine, which I do think is going to be turned into its own location, probably its own chapter, where we fight the Midgard Zalm at the end. The Mithril Mine, I think, is an easy, dedicated chapter. It's already like a 3 or 4 room dungeon within the original FF7, plus we get a little bit of dialogue with the Turks. It's where we first see the character of Elena, which we haven't seen in Remake yet, which would probably mean that it's going to be a boss fight with Elena. We didn't fight any of the Turks there, which didn't really make any sense. It'd be kind of similar to how we're introduced to Reno and Rude when it comes to Remake. When we first really encounter them within the church and within, like, Rabbi Eros' house, we have a boss fight with those characters. It can be the same thing here. Fort Condor is a kind of a hard one. It's one I'm not sure how I feel about, because with it being a board game in the Yuffie DLC, does that mean that they got rid of the minigame that a lot of people didn't like, and they got rid of the entire location of Fort Condor, and just turned it into this, like, kind of fun tower defense game thing? Or when it comes to, like, the narrative and the story of the Fort Condor board game, is that something created by Shinra to try to get the people of Midgar, maybe the world itself, to kind of forget about the location? It's kind of hard to say. Now, if Fort Condor is a location within Remake, I'm sure it'd have its own chapter as well, where we help the people of Fort Condor. Regardless, it's not going to be like it was in the original game. In the original game, you backtrack constantly, all the time to come back. If you want to do everything that Fort Condor has to offer, I don't think that's going to happen with the Remake story. When it comes to the city of Junon, I think that's an easy 2 chapters, and why I say that is because there's essentially 2 different stories that are going on there. When we first get there to Lower Junon, we're trying to get to the top of Junon. We're also helping the little girl, fighting Bottom Swell. I could easily see that being 1 chapter itself. And when it comes to Upper Junon, us trying to get to the cargo ship, of course, to go across the ocean, like, the Upper Junon's, like, really the only other modernized city when it comes to the world of Gaia, right? It's just Midgar and Junon. So I could see them turning the upper part of Junon into a pretty big location that we can explore. A lot of alleyways and stuff, hopefully a lot of buildings we can go into, hopefully all kinds of shit. And then maybe somewhere along the way a boss fight, potentially, because most chapters within Remake end in a boss fight, so who knows exactly. It's also worth mentioning, of course, the underwater reactor, because that is a part of Junon. Now, we don't go there when we first reach Junon in the FF7 story, but that doesn't mean they won't change that for Remake. Because when it comes to Remake, we went to, like, Sector 0, which is, you know, Reactor 0 and shit that's from, like, Dirge to Cerberus, but they incorporate it into the Remake story, so they can maybe incorporate the underwater reactor into an earlier part of the Remake story as well. Now, the underwater reactor could blend with the upper Junon area into, like, an own chapter, or maybe its own dedicated chapter as well. Who knows exactly. Now, of course, the cargo ship has its own story and boss fight, and it's our first, like, real look at Sephiroth in the original FF7 story, so I could see the cargo ship itself being its own chapter. Now, whether or not the Costa del Sol will get its own chapter, or maybe they blend that with the cargo ship, we get off the cargo ship, we do a little bit of exploring and talking and shit within Costa del Sol, and once we leave Costa del Sol, that could start the next chapter, or maybe Costa del Sol got its own chapter too. I don't know. And as much as I love this location, it's so unique in the world of Gaia, I don't think it needs its own dedicated chapter. It's kind of a nothing location, there's nothing really here. You get off the boat, talk to the characters, and you can walk right out the entrance to Mount Corel. Like, you don't ever have to even, like, hang out within, you know, Costa del Sol. Now, if you do, you explore, you do meet Hojo on the beach, get a little bit of exposition and stuff, but you don't have to. Like, none of that's required. So I definitely love if they give something to Costa del Sol. I'm sure they will. They'll give us some sort of narrative or story that happens there, but I don't think it needs to be an entire chapter's worth. I don't even know what you would do if you did, but maybe we hop off the boat, it starts the next chapter at that point, we do a little bit of story stuff within Costa del Sol, and then we leave in the journey to Mount Corel, and then once we get to Mount Corel, that's when it starts the next chapter or something. So obviously, based off what we just said, Mount Corel is going to be its own dedicated chapter. I think that's 100% guarantee. And maybe even the town of Corel, once we get there, like once we reach the town of Corel, maybe that's whenever we do like the story there, learn a bit about Barrett's history or whatever with the town, and then the chapter ends, and then we go on to the Gold Saucer. Now, this being said, we also got to factor in the Mount Corel reactor. In the original Final Fantasy VII, this is a nothing location. We pass right by it. Now, later on in the story, it houses a huge materia, and we can get it or not get it or whatever. But the point is, we don't even interact with this thing at all. I don't know if that's going to be the case when it comes to Remake. I don't see our characters just walking by an entire Mako reactor and maybe not want to attempt to destroy it or shut it down or something. Especially when it's a Mako reactor that's like tucked away in the mountains that has, you know, really no risk of like injuring or harming or killing anybody or whatever the case. So I definitely could see our characters going in there and at least attempting to destroy the thing. Now, whether or not that'd be a part of another chapter or the start of its own chapter, I don't know. We've seen, you know, us destroy 2 reactors within Remake Part 1, and those were all, you know, pretty much their own chapters, so who knows. Gold Saucer, of course, this is easily going to be its own chapter. Now, the desert prison that we go to during the segment of the game, I don't know if they would dedicate an entire chapter to it. I could see them doing that. It'd be pretty easy to. I honestly want 18 chapters of just Barrett and Dine talking. And honestly, with this section of the game, with Barrett giving a history on what happened with, him and Dyne and the town of Corel and Shinra, like, you could maybe turn that into a playable segment where we play with a younger Barrett who has, 2 hands. That'd be kind of cool, and get to actually see the town of Corel before it was destroyed. That'd be awesome. I'd love a little bit of a playable segment. I don't know that it needs to be a flashback, like the, calm flashback, its own whole chapter. Wouldn't be against it, but they could do something here where you could play as, like, Barrett in the past. That'd be pretty cool. So after the prison segment, we get the buggy car from Dio, and this is where we get into an interesting discussion about what they're going to do with Part 2, because if it is some sort of open world where we can explore, based on the original FF7, the town of Gungaga, which is the next named location after Gold Saucer, is an entirely optional location at this point. You can drive right by that and go straight to Cosmo Canyon, and you do not have to visit this location until later on whenever Cloud wakes up there. So that's why I'm wondering what they're going to do with this. And with Zack Fair potentially being alive and shit with the remake story, he seems more integral to the story than even before with the original FF7. I don't know if they're going to handle this, because if it's open world, we should be able to see the town of Gungaga and be like, you know what, I'm going to go right past it. I don't need to go there. I'm going to go straight to Cosmo Canyon. I don't think they're going to allow that. So there might be they might switch up the environments where you're forced to go through Gungaga to get to Cosmo Canyon. I don't know. But within the location of Gungaga, there's a bit of story. We learn about, Aerith's ex-boyfriend, Zack. We learn that's his hometown. We run into the Turks, have a boss fight there. We also see Scarlet. We pick up the Titan material. There's a lot here. A destroyed Mako reactor. So they could definitely turn this into its own chapter easily. Now, if we take a quick pause right there, we're already at 10 locations / chapters with the Calm Flashback, the Chocobo Farm / Midgarzalm Swamp, the Mithril Mine, Lower Junon, Upper Junon, the Cargo Ship / Costa del Sol, the Mount Corel / North Corel, Gold Saucer, Corel Prison, and then, of course, Gungaga. Now, if we factor in some of the other things we discussed, the other questionable locations, we have Fort Condor, the Underwater Reactor, and the Mount Corel Reactor. That's the potential for 3 more chapters alone. So as of right now, if we factor in everything from the Calm Flashback to the village of Gungaga, Zack Fair's hometown, we're already up to the potential of 10 to 13 chapters. That's not even factoring in any of the new stuff they may want to do, and maybe some locations be expanded to 1 or more chapters. Now, beyond Gungaga, we, of course, have Cosmo Canyon, easy chapter, but also has the Cave of Gi, which I've seen some people talk about potentially having its own chapter. I don't know if they would do that. There's not a whole lot. I mean, we get a lot of exposition, a lot of good story stuff within Cosmo Canyon, but I don't know that it needs to, end a whole chapter. Like, you could easily do all the shit we do in Cosmo Canyon, talk to Bugenhagen, get the observatory stuff, and then you could still go into the Cave of Gi and have the boss fight at the end and shit. That could all easily be 1 chapter by itself. So now we're looking at 11 to 12 chapters, depending on how you think they're going to handle Cosmo Canyon and the Cave of the Gi, with the potential of it being upwards of 15 chapters if they factor in some of the other stuff we discussed. And then, after Cosmo Canyon, we of course get to my boy's hometown of Nibelheim. But then we also have the Shinra Mansion / Manor that can be its own potential chapter, depending on how they want to handle that, because that could be a pretty cool location, and the Mountain Bell itself with the Mountain Bell Reactor. And this is why I've always kind of stuck with the potential of Nibelheim being the ending of Part 2, because once you factor it in, you're already up to anywhere between 12 to 16 chapters. And if you want to think about Nibelheim potentially being 2 to 3 chapters, then we're up to 17 or 18 chapters. But again, this isn't even factoring in the potential of brand new stuff, brand new locations or chapters or anything. We're just going off of the locations from the original FF7 and then potentially them flashing back to stuff with Zack. So I don't know how they go beyond Nibelheim when it comes to Part 2. That's kind of my whole takeaway with this video. Now, of course, this is just based off the original FF7 Remake, which was 18 chapters, but you can maybe say 20 chapters if you want to factor in the Yuffie DLC, so we could give a few more chapters to Part 2 as well. The thing is, though, after the Nibelheim segment, we get Rocket Town, which gives us the character of Cid, and we get the Tanya Branca, which allows us to explore a good chunk of the world. But after this, you also have Bone Village and Wu Tai and the Temple of the Ancients, and then you got the City of the Ancients with the end of Disc 1 and stuff, and I just don't know that they're going to do all that more. They could, absolutely. I'm just saying I don't know that they will. But of course, with Part 2 being a PlayStation 5 exclusive, a next generation exclusive if you want to call it that, then you'd think there's going to be more than 18 chapters. It's got to be a bigger game than Part 1, but also got to factor in potentially exploration. So while locations themselves might be chapters, maybe the journey to those locations, Calm to the Mithril Mine, that could be a whole chapter potentially depending on what you do in between those locations. It's hard to say, my dudes. It's all speculation. I'm just going off of the numbers. That's what I like to do with the channel when we do discussions, that based on evidence that we have, and all the evidence that we have is Remake Part 1. But of course, we came back with a lengthy video, way longer than I thought this video was going to be. Holy shit, we're 14, 15 minutes or some shit. Pass it up to you guys. What do you think they're going to do with Part 2? How far do you think we're going to the story? How many locations do you think are going to be dedicated chapters? Do you think each and every named location is going to have its whole dedicated chapter and story? What are your thoughts? We got to wrap this video up. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, guys. Only wants to do more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter, @DavidYT. I'm a Discord. Links to my social networks are in the description and in the outro. Later, guys.
I used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame, we blow that. Like Coltrane, we in here. Like Rogaine, or leave it. Like Cobain.